For decades, running a team meant spending hundreds of millions you'd never get back. But Mercedes just posted $120 million in profit last year, and Williams, a team that was nearly bankrupt in 2020, is now worth over $1 billion. So what changed? Two massive shifts flipped F1's entire economy and turned the paddock into a billion-dollar marketplace. Back in the 1990s, F1 was absolutely brutal for small teams. Teams would appear for a season or two, realize they were losing money like crazy, and then just vanish. Simtech, Pacific, and 40 all appeared and disappeared within a few seasons, unable to secure sustainable funding. Financial collapse always followed the same pattern: runaway spending, dwindling sponsor income, and owners who eventually said, enough. The only reason some teams survived at all was tobacco money. Big Tobacco didn't just fund teams, it completely defined their identity. The John Player Special Black and Gold Lotus wasn't just a paint scheme, it was a brand marriage that made the car itself a 200-mile-per-hour billboard. Some people literally referred to the cars as the John Player Specials more than the Lotus. Marlboro alone was paying around $100 to $160 million per year to sponsor Ferrari from the mid-1990s onward, and they'd been with McLaren for 23 years before that. Other major tobacco sponsors like Rothmans, JPS, and Lucky Strike were pouring tens of millions into teams like Williams, Lotus, and BAR. In the 1980s and 1990s, some teams were getting over 80% of their entire budget from a single tobacco deal. Then, the politics hit. The European Union's Tobacco Advertising Directive outlawed sponsorship in sports around the mid-2000s, snapping the spine of the old business model. When the directive came into force, teams scrambled for workaround liveries. Those blank white bars and barcode stripes on Ferraris were born from this moment. Minardi became the poster child for 1990s survival tactics. They survived from 1985 to 2005 by scraping the absolute bottom of the budget barrel. When Paul Stoddart bought the team in 2001, he paid just $10 million for a team that was literally on the verge of bankruptcy. In their entire 20-year history, they scored only 38 championship points total. The pay driver culture really took off during this period. When teams were desperate for cash just to show up at races, they'd take anyone who brought funding. When the cigarette tide went out, the car makers rolled in. Honda, Toyota, BMW, each came armed with budgets that would make a venture capitalist blush. Toyota built a vast factory in Cologne and charged in as a full constructor in 2002. By 2008, their annual resources hit roughly $445.6 million, tops on the grid, with McLaren and Ferrari also north of $400 million. That wasn't marketing money, that was national state money, and yet Toyota never won a Grand Prix. So why did they light that much cash on fire? Because on a PowerPoint, the synergy looked perfect. Hybrid technologies were coming, aero feeds road cars, the halo effect juices sales. BMW bought into Sauber, took a clinical path up the grid, and even won in 2008. Honda built out the Brackley operation that would later become Mercedes. But then 2008 happened. The global financial crisis hit, and the optics of spending $400 million a year to go racing turned radioactive in boardrooms. Honda was first to quit at the end of 2008, followed by BMW and Toyota in 2009. In the 2000s, F1 had no spending cap whatsoever. It was basically a financial arms race where the richest teams usually won. McLaren CEO Zak Brown summed it up perfectly. Back then, F1 was about who could afford to lose the most money each year. When the financial crisis hit in 2008 to 2009, manufacturers fled like rats from a sinking ship. Several new entrants came in around 2010, hoping things would get cheaper, but found themselves completely outgunned. HRT entered in 2010 and folded after 2012. Caterham started in 2010, spent years at the back and collapsed in 2014. Marussia was even worse. They racked up over $200 million in losses from 2010 to 2014, fell into administration and missed the last races of 2014. By one analysis covering 2011 to 2013, F1 teams combined for over $520 million in net losses, and only 3 of the 11 teams were profitable. Even midfield teams weren't safe. In 2013, Lotus famously couldn't pay Kimi Raikkonen. The team owed him $24 million in salary. Force India went into administration in 2018 despite decent results when owner Vijay Mallya's legal troubles cut off the money flow. One team that did get creative was Haas, when Gene Haas entered in 2016. Instead of designing everything in-house, Haas contracted Dallara to design their chassis and bought engines, gearboxes and many parts from Ferrari. This slashed their required budget to around $100 million, roughly half that of established midfield teams. They operated with about 250 staff versus 800 to 1,000 at top teams. Meanwhile, Mercedes spent around $484 million in 2019 alone, and Ferrari about $463 million, while Haas was operating on around $130 million. The World Constructors' Championship was consistently won by the highest spending team right up to 2020. Money literally equaled speed.
I was trying to look up the other day, and I just haven't had the time, how many teams we've had in Formula One since 1950.
And here's the ugly truth about the pre-Liberty money split. Love him or loathe him, Bernie Ecclestone turned F1 into a commercial behemoth. In 2018, F1's total revenue was around $1.8 billion, and teams got roughly 47% of TV revenues under Bernie's system. The real problem wasn't the percentage though, it was how that money got carved up. The whole thing worked on 2 columns that basically guaranteed the rich stayed rich and the poor stayed poor. Column 1 gave equal payments to teams that had finished in the top 10 in 2 of the past 3 seasons, about 10% each of half the total pot. Sounds fair enough, right? Wrong. This immediately excluded new teams or those having bad runs. Column 2 was where things got proper ridiculous. This was based on championship position, but the gap was enormous. First place got 14% of the pot, while 10th got just 6%. So if you were fighting at the back, you were getting screwed on both of those columns. But it gets worse. Ferrari got 2.5% straight off the top before anyone else even got a look, just for being Ferrari. Then there were these massive Constructor Championship bonuses, worth $100 million total. But guess what? Only the top 3 teams got to split that money. Mercedes would get 37% of it, Ferrari and Red Bull would divvy up the rest, and everyone else could sod off. The system was so rigged that McLaren could finish 9th out of 10 teams but still get the 4th biggest payout because they had better historical deals and bilateral agreements. Meanwhile, Force India could have their best season ever, finish 4th in the championship and still get less money than McLaren, who'd had a disaster year. It was completely backwards. When Liberty Media bought F1 for $4.4 billion in 2017, they thought switching to a fairer model would be straightforward. The negotiations for the new Concord agreement turned into an absolute shambles that dragged on for 3 bloody years. The big teams weren't exactly thrilled about giving up their advantages. Mercedes was particularly vocal, with Toto Wolff declaring that Mercedes was the biggest victim of the new proposals. By August 2020, Wolff was still refusing to sign and accused other teams of being up the arse of Liberty while complaining privately. Ferrari managed to keep both their historic veto power and their special, longest-standing team payment of around $50 million per year. COVID threw another massive spanner in the works, and Wolff later admitted he changed his stance because he didn't think that the teams would ever be united. In the end, Mercedes only signed after last-minute talks between Wolff and Chase Carey just before the August deadline. The numbers actually show this new system actually works, In 2023, Formula One's group revenue was $3.22 billion, of which 38%, about $1.22 billion, was paid out to the 10 teams as prize money and other payments. That pot grew from $1.16 billion the year before, showing both F1's growth and Liberty's willingness to share the gains. For 2024, Liberty reported F1 revenue hit $3.41 billion, up 5.9% annually, with operating income rising from 9.1% to $791 million. Liberty's system is way more equal, though it's still not perfect. Every team gets about $35 million as a base payment right off the bat, no questions asked, no performance required. That's already more than some teams used to get for finishing in the points under Bernie's setup. Then there's a much flatter sliding scale based on championship position instead of the old brutal column 2 system. The exact percentages are kept secret, but the gap between first and last is now maybe $40 to $50 million instead of the $100 million plus chasm under Bernie. Still significant money, but not completely insane. Ferrari still gets special treatment because, let's face it, they're Ferrari and Liberty knows which side their bread is buttered. They get 5% of the total pot as their heritage payment, actually more than Bernie's 2.5%. But here's the key difference. The overall bonus payments have dropped from 31% of the total to 25%. So while Ferrari gets a bigger slice, but the pie they're taking it from is smaller. There's also a separate bonus pot for teams that finished in the top 3 in the past 10 years, which includes Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren and Williams. This comes from 20% of F1 revenue above $650 million, so it's basically extra money on top rather than taking from the main pot. The big change is that 75% of the prize money now goes to equal payments and performance-based payouts, compared to only 69% before. That might not sound like much, but when you're talking about over $1 billion, those extra percentage points mean tens of millions for the smaller teams. This is why Gunther Steiner said Haas wouldn't exist without these changes, and why teams like Williams can actually plan for the future instead of just hoping to survive until next month. The system still rewards success, but it doesn't completely shaft you for having the audacity to exist as a small team. The real game changer was the budget cap. Starting in 2021, F1 instituted its first ever cost cap, initially $145 million, dropping to $135 million from 2023 onward. This covers most race-related spending but excludes marketing, driver salaries, and the top 3 personal salaries. The cap isn't toothless. Red Bull's 2021 overspend led to a $7 million fine and a 10% reduction in aerodynamic testing allocation. Christian Horner said the aerodynamic testing restrictions meant the team could no longer commit development time to the current year's car, instead focusing fully on the following season. The cap changed the rhythm of development. You can't brute force mid-season upgrade packages anymore, so teams talk about trade-offs, about whether a new floor now means delaying a wing later. Adrian Newey pointed out an unexpected consequence. As the cost cap does come with hidden penalties, Formula One is no longer the best paid industry, so teams are struggling to get top graduates from universities. Still, Toto Wolff said F1 under the cap became a genuinely sustainable business, where teams can forecast costs accurately and plan multi-year deals. Gunther Steiner put it more bluntly: without the cost cap, Haas wouldn't be around anymore, and neither would other teams, because the gap between rich and poor just got too big. By capping expenses and boosting revenues, most teams can now break even or better. In 2021, teams like Haas finally spent at similar levels to their rivals, and owners no longer had to routinely write personal checks to cover deficits. 2023 marked a proper watershed. For the first time in memory, multiple F1 teams reported healthy profits. Mercedes F1 had £83.8 million in net profit despite poor on-track performance. McLaren swung from a £9 million loss in 2022 to a £12.9 million profit in 2023. Ferrari's F1 program is also believed to be profitable now. Not every team is in the black though. Some midfield teams still report losses as they reinvest in infrastructure. Aston Martin had a $27 million loss in 2022, investing in a new factory and wind tunnel. Williams had a massive $100 million loss in 2022 under new ownership, as they rebuilt competitiveness. Red Bull Racing appears to run at essentially break-even, ploughing most income back into the team. In 2023, Red Bull's profit was reportedly only £1.3 million, highlighting that even if F1 teams can make money now, their competitive nature pushes them to spend as much as allowed. 80% of teams turned a profit in 2023, according to Sportico's analysis. Here's the crucial bit that shows just how much the economics have changed. F1 teams generated a combined $2.04 billion in sponsorship revenue in 2024, while Liberty Media paid out $1.266 billion in prize money. The numbers tell the real story. Red Bull and Ferrari now both receive around $100 million annually from their title sponsors, Oracle and HP respectively, which is nearly 3/4 of the entire cost cap budget. Red Bull just lost their Bybit deal worth $150 million over 3 years, $50 million annually, but immediately replaced it with Gate.io, showing how in demand these partnerships have become. McLaren generated $148.1 million in sponsorship revenue in 2023 from 53 different partners, with CEO Zak Brown claiming they now have the most commercial revenue that a racing team has ever had. Their biggest single deal is OKX at $25 million per year, but they've diversified brilliantly with major partnerships from Google, MasterCard, and dozens of others. Mercedes, despite having fewer partnerships, 25, still pulls in an estimated 150 to 200 million euros from sponsorship, with their Petronas deal alone worth 59 million euros in 2022. By the way, I've made an entire video about Zak Brown dragging McLaren back to the front of the grid. You should check it out. And if you made it this far into the video, consider subscribing to the channel, as I'm trying to get to 50,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. Subscribe! Even mid-grid teams are cashing in. Aston Martin gets $35 million annually from Aramco, while smaller teams that would have been scraping by in the old days now have solid commercial foundations. The average F1 sponsorship deal is worth $6 million, over 8 times the NFL's average of $745,000, with each team averaging $203 million in total sponsor dollars. The prize money, while still significant, is now more like a performance bonus on top of the real moneymakers. In 2024, McLaren earned around $140 million for winning the Constructors' Championship, while Sauber got $60 million for finishing last, a much flatter distribution than Bernie's old system, but still dwarfed by sponsorship revenue for most teams.
And the Italian Grand Prix is underway!
One massive outcome of F1's new financial stability is team valuations going absolutely mental. Every F1 team is now worth over $1 billion for the first time, with the average valuation hitting $2.31 billion in 2024, up 44% from 2023. Ferrari leads the way at $4.78 billion, followed by Mercedes, $3.94 billion, and Red Bull Racing, $3.5 billion. Even Haas in 10th is worth $1.02 billion. Williams, which was bought by Dorilton Capital in 2020 for approximately $200 million, is now valued at $1.24 billion. But why did the team valuations explode so rapidly? Formula One teams are valued at 6.1 times revenue on average, up from 5.1 last year and ahead of top global soccer clubs. It still lags the NBA, 11, NFL, 9.3, and MLB, 6.5, but the gap is closing. F1 teams also benefit from scarcity. There are only 10 teams versus 30 or more in major North American sports leagues. This success has a side effect. Existing teams have become protective of their club. With each team now a franchise in limited supply, incumbents resist expanding the grid. Any new entrant has to pay a hefty anti-dilution team, initially $200 million under the 2021 Concord Agreement, split among existing teams as compensation. Given today's team valuations, most bosses now argue $200 million is far too low. Draft proposals for the post-2025 Concord Agreement suggest raising the new team fee to about $600 million. The saga with General Motors entering via Cadillac shows this tension perfectly. Despite Andretti having serious racing credentials and GM backing, most teams and F1 management gave his effort a cool reception. At the time, F1 said that the most significant way in which a new entrant would bring value is by being competitive, and didn't think Andretti would be able to compete at the current F1 level. F1's decision proved controversial, and the Andretti organization took its complaints to the Department of Justice in the US over potential anti-competition breaches. And F1 doesn't really like scandals. Greg Maffei, CEO of Liberty Media, allegedly told Mario Andretti that he would guarantee Michael Andretti never gained entry to Formula One. In a shock move in October 2024, Michael Andretti announced he would be stepping back from the day-to-day running of a motorsport empire, which seems to be the change F1 was looking for in approving the new team's bid. In November 2024, Formula One announced it had reached an agreement in principle with General Motors to add a GM Cadillac team to the grid in 2026, but crucially, there was no mention of the Andretti name within its initial reveal. The team will drop its Andretti branding and run as GM Cadillac, though the team will effectively be the same Andretti Global program now operated by Dan Tauris. The BBC reported that an agreement has been reached for GM to pay a dilution fee of $450 million for its 2026 entry, more than double the $200 million specified in the 2020 Concord Agreement. GM will also face hundreds of millions in startup costs to join the grid in 2026. The team will use Ferrari power units initially, then transition to GM's own engines by 2029. This closed-shop mentality contrasts sharply with the 1990s and 2000s, when new teams came and went frequently. Now, with the sport so financially attractive, barriers to entry are extremely high because incumbent teams don't want their billion-dollar valuations diluted. When people ask, do F1 teams actually make money now? The honest answer is, some do, on purpose, some don't, on purpose, and almost all could, which is the revolution. But under the hood, the economics finally behave like a business, one with hard caps, recurring revenue, and a modern understanding of brand. The miracle isn't that a few teams make a profit now, it's that the system lets them. The only question left is, if Cadillac is coming to F1, would they be competitive? Top 5 finish in the first year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.